course, I won't tell you everything of this restoration process, but I will try to tell you many things concerning the treatment and conservation treatments on these 4 manuscripts in general. So for you all, I welcome you all to the second session of our meeting, focused on the conservation project of the 4 manuscripts. To start, I cannot but renew my thanks to the Superior General, Arturo Sosa, to Father Keruel, to the Arsi, to Father Echarte, and to the Gondra Barandarian Foundation, because really, in this case, they all made this project possible and successful. I am pleased to present you the 4 manuscripts, first of all, and we will follow all them before, during, and after the conservation treatment. This codex, the first one, is the oldest evidence of the spiritual exercises. It is composed of 2 distinct manuscripts. They were written independently of each other in the 40s of the 16th century. The first one on your left is the Spanish text of the spiritual exercises. It was annotated by Saint Ignatius' own hand. And the second one is the Latin Exercitia Spiritualia on your right. I would like to show you different watermarks that we can examine with the help of a transmitted light. That's why heterogeneous papers were used to manufacture the book. This volume and the other 3 manuscripts as well underwent a repair in the first decades of the 20th century. I mentioned this repair in the first session. The intervention was aimed at limiting the effects of chemical degradation induced by inks. And we will return to this aspect in a while, in the next slides. But here, I want to point out that this manuscript was unbound to be restored at that time. Then the restored gatherings were resewn and provided of a new binding, the one that you can see here and that you can see in front of you. Portions of the old tanned leather cover with gold decorations were fit and molded into place on the new boards, directly onto new deep blue leather cover. And you can see this is part of the old cover, all this, and all the structure is a new manufacture. During restoration, the damaged papers were lined with silk, and you can see silk threads emerging from the edge of the volume in this picture. The second codex is the spiritual diary, autograph, written in Spanish by Saint Ignatius, and just 2 sections of the diary survived his death, and that's why it has always been, they have always been respected as venerable objects, not only for the text, also for their material evidence. And also this volume is composed of 2 different parts. The autograph in Spanish on your left is bound together with the Italian version that was written by the cleric Jean Vizet at the beginning of the 17th century. The manuscript has a cloth cover embellished with a nice embroidery. Here you can only see the embroidery all along the board, the margin of the boards. A handwritten note clarifies that this binding was commissioned in 1745 by the Jesuit Cardinal Juan Alvaro Cienfuegos Villasón, who had the Codex on loan for a period and expressed his gratitude by returning the volume provided with this new precious cover, because the border is sewn with silver thread. And you can appreciate the cover in front of you and in the slide. The cloth cover, it is a silk and silver threads. Only the long ties seem not to be coherent with the age of the binding, as they are machine made. They were put in another time on the Codex. Codex A contains the first draft of the constitutions. It is a collection of heterogeneous documents completed in 1550 and revised by the saint. The volume had, not has, not yet, but had a modern book binding with a tanned leather cover. We do not really know when it was realized. And above all, it presented some structural defects, in particular, a very tight spine, limiting the readability of the text in these areas. I can't read the written here and in many other bifolia of the book. The last one is Codex B, the Constitution's Codex B, and was completed in 1553. And, oh, sorry, okay. And it has a red cloth cover with a blue velvet folded over cover. The last one, the blue over cover, was really in critical conditions due to lacunas and fraying, as evident from the picture. You can see the overcover with the tears here and all around the perimeter of the board. This binding is dated to, this is a handwritten note by Father Franz Erle. He was head of the Vatican Library at the time, and he writes to have taken in charge the manuscript for a restoration treatment. The note is dated November 1908, the beginning of the 20th century. The Jesuit Franz Erle has been an important actor in the manuscript preservation and conservation field. In 1898, he organized an international conference in the Swiss city St. Gallen. And he was particularly interested in the issue of manuscripts damaged by corrosive inks. And black inks were causing the main degradative process in the four manuscripts too. They all the inks, are iron gold inks and were traditionally prepared by mixing green vitriol, iron sulfate, chemically, with chopped oak galls and gum arabic. Iron gold inks induce paper degradation due to the action of the iron ions and of the sulfuric acid produced during the vitriol gallic acid reaction. As you can see in our manuscript, the process resulted in discoloration with the transversal and lateral migration of the colored ink compounds and halo formation around the written, like in this case. Ink diffusion through the paper, the second picture, and especially burn through. The level of degradation is more or less severe depending on the quality of the papers and the inks. But in general, the readability of the texts was dramatically affected. As mentioned before, in the first decades of the last century, the manuscript underwent an intervention aimed at limiting the corrosive effects of the iron gall inks. And the work was probably carried out under the supervision of Father Erle of the Vatican Library, or in any case, in accordance with the methodology applied to Codex P in 1908. All the leaves were lined on both sides with silk in order to prevent the risk of paper fragmentation. And you can have an idea of the texture of the silk. In this picture, you can see all the little squares. It is the silk leaf. And also of the collateral effects of this operation. For example, many stains of the adhesive used at that time, it was gelatin, that is an animal adhesive, and the shining of the paper surface treated with gelatin. So a deep intervention, but unfortunately, nothing was done to limit the ink chemical aggression. Being very acid, it continued to cause damages to papers. Moreover, the use of hot liquid water-based gelatin for the silk application has rather accelerated the burn-through process, producing crackling and new fragile areas prone to fragmentation. In this slide, we can compare a photographic reproduction of the spiritual exercise made in 1908 with an image taken in 2015, the first two pictures, and the reproduction of a spiritual diary made in the first half of the 20th century with a picture taken before the last intervention in 2017. And we all can realize that the text condition had worsened. Finally, the silk, which was originally very transparent, was aged and yellowed. That's why a new conservation project was developed to contrast the degradation processes and to improve the chemical, physical, and also aesthetic condition of the manuscripts. The project involved the participation of archivists, paleographers, chemists, and conservators, and was conceived as an open project, as I pointed out in our first session. That is, it was gradually outlined on the basis of data acquired from the analysis performed by the University in Padua. Investigation carried out before treatment had a fundamental role in characterizing inks and papers to understand where and what to do something. The analysis performed during treatment allowed us to plan a punctual and suitable intervention procedure. And after treatment, we could evaluate the impact of treatments, especially water-based operations, on inks and papers. The conservation process required the unbinding of the manuscript and consisted of several steps. One of the most critical operations was the removal of the silk from the sheets. Because of the bad condition of papers and inks, it was necessary to soften the adhesive to allow a safe mechanical traction of the silk. A controlled humidification was therefore achieved with the local application of a water-based chemical gel. It is a gel characterized by a network having a very high water retention. That is, I use water, but it has in the gel. It doesn't go through the paper directly. The action of the gel was limited to the interface avoiding the penetration of water into papers. You can see the gel. It is let to work on the paper, and then we can try to put the silk away. And also in this case, the gel transparency made it possible to check the ink response during the treatment. Remember that water or humidity, moisture, can push the ink through the paper. So to give halos, for example. As a result of the operation, the gelatin softened, allowing the silk to be removed by gentle mechanical action with a tweezer, for example, as you can see. In the areas of the bifolia presenting crackling or fragmentation due to ink corrosion, once removed the silk, it was necessary to increase the paper mechanical strength. A very light Japanese paper was therefore applied with the gelatin, and you can see the light Japanese paper in this area. I put a wood spatula underneath, and you can see it is quite transparent. We used gelatin, I was saying. Why did we use gelatin again? Because it is well demonstrated, that gelatin can enhance the mechanical properties of paper. Okay, all of us can know it, but also it can stabilize mobile iron ions present in the inks. Gelatin can bond them into an elastic film, making them inert, no longer aggressive for the papers. But in this case, the gelatin was not applied liquid and hot, as in the previous intervention. It was hot prepared, let to cool, and then pushed through a steel sieve to obtain a creamy gel suitable for use with a brush, so reducing the amount of water affecting the paper. And this is the process. The gelatin during preparation, then on the steel, and then the creamy gel we obtained to work, gelatin to work with the brush, just in the inked areas of the leaves. No. Surface pH was measured, and the results were in the range of acidity, as you can see, 4.45, for example. In any case, around 4 and well below 5. 5 could be an acceptable value for the pH in this case. We considered it necessary to counteract acidity connected to the iron gold inks using a non-aqueous system and to provide an alkaline reserve acting the paper as a buffer to contrast acids also in the future. And to this aim, a dispersion of calcium hydroxide nanoparticles in isopropanol was applied by brushing, granting a good penetration into paper fibers. The pH was checked on the same points after treatment. It raised to reach neutrality or slightly alkaline values. For example, in this case, 7.68. At this point, the introduction of a minimal amount of moisture was necessary to rehydrate the treated leaves, realigning the formations and restoring a planar surface because they all had to go back to the original covers, to the original bindings. So also sizes of the leaves was important. The special membrane used, this is a membrane called sympatex, and you put the leaves in the middle of the two membranes, and you close you make an enclosure during this treatment. And sympatex allowed humidity to reach the papers without wetting them. Moisture, never water on the papers. This is important as humidification techniques are known to potentially induce diffusion of inks towards the paper and halo formation. That's why a very special attention was paid to the duration of the treatment. It was reduced to some minutes, just enough to relax paper fibers evenly. Then the humidified leaves were put on a stainless steel frame, and magnetic pads were put all along the perimeter of the leaves. This method can induce paper fibers to tension gently, not to be pressed, just tension, while drying at natural ventilation. Japanese paper and gelatin, again, were used for repairing tears and infilling of losses. Mending papers were torn to limit the aesthetic clashes with the original supports, and where possible to restore or to help a better text. Oh no, it's no. Sorry, tell me. To restore or trying or help to restore a better readability of the text. 27 restored with the Japanese toned fibers. After paper treatments, the gatherings were recomposed and resewn before being reassembled with the original bindings. The cloth covers of the spiritual diary on your left and of Codex P of Constitutions were repaired using needles and threads, never adhesives, so not to change the quality, the color, the texture of the historical cloth. The addition of a stylish embroidery was the solution to fill in the lacunas of the blue overcover all along the perimeters of the board. In other case, we should change the binding, but remember that this binding is dated. It is a particular moment in the history of book conservation. A new binding was realized for Codex A. It is now, you can see in front of you, it is now a limp archival binding. You remember that the book couldn't open in a proper way at the beginning. It is a limp archival binding with a flap. This is the flap. And a long tie in alum toad skin. And this binding structure is coherent with the historical context of the 16th century and can grant at the same time the access to the text better than the previous stiff leather binding, which is preserved apart at the moment. The conserved manuscripts were housed in individual clamshell boxes suitable for long-term preservation. Boxes, as I told you in the previous session, do not only prevent the risk of dust or mechanical damages to the volumes, They also safeguard them from light, from fluctuations of the thermohygrometric conditions that could affect the preservation of these precious works. And to conclude, I would like you to see, you can see also from the material ones, but I would like you to see the manuscript after conservation treatment, starting from the spiritual diary, the spiritual exercises, also with its clamshell box, and the Constitution's Codex P. We have already seen the Constitution's volumes A before. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. The most difficult part is the operation who required moisture, because you have to check continuously if inks change. Okay, and they can change in every moment, because a bit of moisture, more moisture, can induce transmigration of the iron ions in the paper. So you lost the written. The written can change, of course. You lost readability of the written. So, and also the feeling of losses in the inked areas of the manuscript, because they were a lot. It was a very long part of the work, of course.
Thank you, Melania, for the presentation. During the process of restoration,
Okay.
Thank you. My question, thank you. My question is, if during the process of the restoration, have you found in any pages, maybe text that will be lost forever? I mean, it is impossible to recover, maybe because it's very deeply damaged, maybe, and we will never know what was written there.
Yes.
Thank you.
There are some papers where we couldn't fill in all the losses, then just put the Japanese paper to reinforce the mechanical strength of the leaves, because you can't. In some cases, we could compare the lost text with the reproduction we had, the historical reproduction, photographic reproduction of 1908, for example, or of the beginning of the last century, but it was not always possible to restore all the text, because especially the constitutions were written with a very acid inks, not a very many different, very acid inks. So it's not possible to restore everything. Now they are mechanically reinforced. So we think we won't have lost of text anymore, but we have also transparency, okay?
Melania, lo faccio in italiano.
Sì.
Riguardo alla novità del tuo lavoro con le nanoparticelle, cosa significa questo per il lavoro di restauro e in che modo si può continuare o lavorare per il restauro di documenti di tipo storico? Perché mi sembra che questa è stata una novità che avevi lavorato anche con l'Università di Pisa, se non ricordo male, per un professore dell'Università di Pisa.
Sì.
Per questo.
Rispondo in italiano? Posso rispondere in italiano? E dunque veramente le nanotecnologie e la ricerca di nanomateriali per la conservazione di beni culturali, non solo beni librari e archivistici, il discorso è iniziato su altre categorie di beni culturali, è una frontiera nuova, innovativa, perché i nanomateriali sono strutturati in modo, detto in maniera molto semplice da trasmettere, da poter utilizzare una quantità di materiale di restauro inferiore che utilizzando materiali di concezione tradizionale. Allora, l'idrossido di calcio è un prodotto, è un composto deacidificante che si è utilizzato spesso in passato, tradizionalmente, per la deacidificazione di inchiostri che si trovavano in questa condizione, molto acidi, ma presentava diversi inconvenienti o effetti collaterali. Ad esempio perché l'idrossido di calcio porta il pH della carta che viene trattata immediatamente in un range di basicità molto elevata e questo comporta uno shock dal punto di vista del cambiamento di pH che ha delle ripercussioni sulla stabilità del materiale cartaceo. Formulati come nanocalcio, come nanoparticelle di idrossido di calcio, questo materiale può essere utilizzato perché l'innalzamento del pH avviene in maniera molto più graduale. È un processo molto più lungo, ma che possiamo controllare veramente passo passo, quindi fermarci all'innalzamento del pH che non raggiunge livelli di basicità così elevati, ma che è comunque sufficiente o buono per contrastare l'acidità dell'inchiostro. E questa è una cosa. I nanogel chimici, questi gel strutturati in maniera da poter essere caricati con acqua, ma con una matrice che la trattiene e la fa arrivare al supporto cartaceo in maniera molto lenta, la prima fase di contatto è quasi di passaggio solo di vapore alla superficie della carta e a noi è stato sufficiente quella. Poi io potrei anche utilizzarli per produrre un'umidificazione più intensa della carta, che però qui non era necessaria, per noi non era una cosa positiva. Anche questi gel sono un grande aiuto, perché nel caso di questi manoscritti, ogni volta che io uso il mezzo acquoso diretto sulla carta, comporto la difficoltà degli inchiostri di rimanere stabili. E quindi comporto comunque un trasferimento di ioni ferro, un passaggio di inchiostro recto verso, il che mi sconsiglia dall'utilizzare i metodi tradizionali. E l'altra cosa, ribadisco, è che la quantità di materiale di restauro che io lascio poi sull'originale è inferiore. E siccome l'intervento di restauro sempre modifica la materialità dell'oggetto, anche limitare questo cambiamento dal punto di vista storico vuol dire, perché mi interessa l'originalità, no? L'autenticità dell'oggetto.
È la prima volta ad usare questa tecnologia è stata lei?
No,
sulla carta.
Tu accennavi prima
sì.
al rapporto con un centro che ha messo, dell'Università di Firenze, che ha messo a punto questi gel, questi composti nanostrutturati, e loro avevano già fatto dei test anche su materiale cartaceo. Questo forse è stato uno dei primi casi in cui, soprattutto per le nanoparticelle, l'utilizzo è stato abbastanza esteso. Non tutte le carte, abbiamo valutato, perché se il pH, anche dove l'inchiostro non era perfetto, se il pH comunque aveva un valore che si aggirava su 5 o era leggermente superiore a 5, noi non abbiamo ritenuto opportuno di deacidificare la carta. Però la quantità, certo, di fogli che qui sono stati trattati con le nanoparticelle è superiore a quella di qualunque altro test fatto prima. Ecco perché abbiamo affiancato un monitoraggio chimico-fisico molto stretto.
Una domanda di archivo storico. And they want to know, why did you only change the binding of 2 pieces and not all of them? Why not change the 3 bindings and keep the previous ones separately, as in the first case?
Sorry, can you repeat the first part of the question?
Yes, why did you only change the binding of 2 pieces and not all of them? Why not change the 3 bindings and keep the previous ones separately, as you did in the first case?
Because they are historical bindings. That's why I told you that we found a data, and we found, yes, handwritten note with, they are dated. They can allow us to put this manuscript in the context of the conservation of historical manuscript, for example, connected them to the to Franz Herle, to the Jesuit Franz Herle. And in the case of the diary, because the binding was a present of the Cardinal Cienfuegos, who got the book for loan, and when returned the book, wanted to express his gratitude with the new binding. And it was precious because silk or cloth in general is usually a precious material to cover historical books. Okay, that's why. The binding we just Codex A was rebinding, has a new binding, but that's why the old one, not the original one, because it was not, of course, the original one, but the old one couldn't allow the right access to the text. So for this reason, not to force anymore the book to read in the back areas.
Okay. Thank you. I have the next question, and I will ask in English if you don't mind.
Okay. I hope to understand correctly.
Thank you. Two quick questions. The first one is whether it's possible to give an expert estimation of how much life you have added to the manuscripts.
Oh.
Probably they can last for
great question.
a few more centuries. And then if you were to advise the people who will be looking after these manuscripts from now onwards, what would you tell them? What should they be looking for, signs of damage or something like that? Okay. What kind of advice would you give?
So concerning the life, how long it will be in the future, thanks to our contribution, that's the question. It does not depend only on the conservation treatment. It also depends on the access in the future, how many people, in which way they will consult it, they will read the text. And also it depends on the environment in which the manuscript will be preserved in the future. That's why we provided individual boxes, because we need to keep environmental condition as stable as possible in terms of humidity, first of all, because now you know that humidity is the enemy #1 for inks and paper in this condition. So humidity, temperature, also light can affect the long light exposure can affect historical paper and historical inks. And of course, also pollution, if they remain at the plein air. And as for the access, to be careful. So first of all, we all have the photographic reproduction of the text. So if we need to access the textual information, maybe we can use from everywhere in the world, the photographic reproduction, the digitization we did of the text. If we need to understand the Ignatius hand from the ink he was using in the past, maybe I need to have a look directly on the historical manuscript. But how many people do need it? Do really need it? So codicologists, paleographers, some historians, of course, but not all the people who would like to access the text or the textual information. To be careful, for example, not to put hands directly on the written leaves, of course. Not only for the pressure, but also because hands can put moisture on the inks, on the papers, and moisture again is our enemy number one. Not to stay too long on the same leaf, to read the same leaf, to look for something on the same leaf, because it's better to change the position of the book, to use supports to put the book on when I need to read the text. I need to open, to close the book. And to be careful also that every book, every volume has a mechanical, makes a mechanical effort when it is open and closed, and all the elements except for the sewn, because the sewing was renewed in this case, but all the historical elements are historical, they are aged. So I can't repeat the same movements many times, of course. I can't stress the books too much. I say this, but also consider that direct access to book is important to allow them to exist in the future. I would not like that we all use only photographic reproduction, because to have the material, the physical object in our mind, is important to remember that it exists. And it is important to remember that if the object does exist, I must preserve it. Okay?
I think that it's arrived the time of finishing this conference.
Okay.
Thank you very much,
Thank you to
Melania Zanetti, and thank you all for being here, and for all the people that hears us from all around the world. Thank you very much, and good evening.